Hello, everyone. Welcome back to ITI and Insights, the International Committee for IT Standards. And Insights is the ANSI accredited SDO supported by ITI, the Information Technology Industry Council. I am David Bain, the Insights Executive Director, and I have the great privilege of moderating today our discussion of quantum computing standards. We have such an extraordinary group of panelists, experts, and I think it's very fitting that we discuss quantum computing today, because today, November 10th, here in Washington, D.C., it seems like the world, or at least the House and the Senate, are in a state of quantum superposition, because we still don't know which way these things will roll with the election outcomes. So we have had roundtables so far this year on standards for cybersecurity, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, blockchain, and next month's topic on December 16th will be IT sustainability and resource efficient data centers. So we hope that you'll join us for that one. And you can see all of the Insights Standards Committees at insights.org/committees and click to participate in a committee of your interest or expertise. Let's just say a special thanks to the folks who've helped put together this roundtable series. All of our friends at ANSI, including Liliana Buchstein at ITI, Christine Reck, Ashley Barang, Julia Moore at Insights, our VP Lynn Berra, Standards Fellow Zamilan Munksjardal, and our Quantum Committee lead Bill Ash. And let's also thank especially our Quantum Committee Chair, Claire Aloka from NIST, who is with us today. Claire will be our first panelist, and just a few notes about our discussion. The discussion today is not Chatham House rules. It's on the record. However, per our custom in these roundtables, unless otherwise specifically stated, all of the statements and opinions expressed are presumed to not represent the position of the speaker's respective organization, and that goes true. That stands also for you, the roundtable participants, when you submit your question. And please do participate and submit questions online. We'll get to as many as possible. We'll consider that the question is coming from you personally and not from your organization. But you are an important part of this conversation. And before I introduce our first distinguished panelist, let me just read out the scope of the Committee of Insights, Quantum Computing. The scope of the committee is first to serve as the U.S. tag to ISO IEC JTC1 Work Group 14, to serve as a focus of and proponent for JTC1's standardization program on quantum computing, identifying gaps and opportunities in quantum computing standardization, to maintain and develop a list of existing quantum computing standards produced and standards development projects underway in ISO TCs, IEC TCs, technical committees, and in JTC1, Joint Technical Committee 1, to develop deliverables in the area of quantum computing, and lastly, as a systems integration entity, maintain relationships with other ISO and IEC technical committees and other organizations that are involved in the field of quantum computing standardization. With that, I'd like to welcome Claire Aloka from NIST. Claire, hey, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having us and for putting together this roundtable on an extremely important subject.
Well, we're so glad to have you. And you can see I'm
Definitely gold star.
NIST official issue receptacle for caffeine, or as it's known in Gaithersburg, C8H10N4O2.
Well done.
Okay. Claire, just so people can get to know your perspective a little bit, let me read your short bio. You are the senior advisor, in addition to chairing the Insights Quantum Committee. You are the senior advisor for standardization in the Standards Coordination Office of NIST, which is the NIST standardization focal point for the federal government and a key information source for U.S. industry on standards-related market access issues. You lead and support extensive standards development activity, as well as associated standards and conformity assessment policy. You have over 30 years of experience in program and strategic management and R&D for biotech standards, quantum computing, advanced materials, manufacturing, cyber physical systems, surface engineering, and measurement technology. You hold several standards related leadership positions domestically and internationally. You have degrees in material science and engineering, geochemistry from MIT, and an MS in ceramic engineering from University of Illinois, and an executive master of management and of technology from UPenn School of Engineering and Wharton. That's so impressive. I also noticed, by the way, that while you were at MIT, you were part of the Arthurian Legends Society. So,
Wow, you dug.
we do our research.
Yes,
and,
I'm impressed.
And that makes me think about, King Arthur and Merlin, and how quantum, it seems like magic to sometimes.
Well, quantum in many ways is like the quest for the Holy Grail. So, and we've even got the UK here to help us represent that with us today. But yeah, it's an interesting path. One of the observations that I have made about quantum technologies in general is that, in fact, one of the debates we're having right now is that quantum covers so many areas and from so many different points of view. And one of the key standards questions we're finding is, how do you actually categorize it for standardization? In fact, it's one of the questions that we're discussing today. So it's sort of a good place to start. I don't know if you want me to just sort of jump into, or
yeah, if you might start with giving us sort of an overview of the matrix of standards organizations, and perhaps, Insights is very influential in the JTC1 world. Can you, for the uninitiated, can you tell us what's special about JTC1 and the fact that the committee that you chair is a US tag? What does that mean anyway?
Okay, certainly, sure. I'm happy to start there. First, we can all acknowledge that its standardization is, if nothing else, an alphabet soup. And you will hear more acronyms there than I've ever heard in my entire life if you jump into standards. But ISO and IEC, ISO is the International Organization for Standardization, but it's translated into French, which is where you get ISO, although they'll tell you it's Greek for equality as well. You can argue about what is actually the motivator for ISO. And IEC is the electrotechnical version of ISO. So IEC, the International Electrotechnical Commission, covers everything electrotechnical. ISO covers everything else. And then ITUT, which has a different model, they look at telecommunications. But those are the three organizations in the world that arguably no one will debate whether they are international standards facilitators. Other organizations are also international, depending on how you define international. And so in the world of quantum, at the ISO and IEC level, we have, there's also a joint technical committee that bridges both ISO and IEC, and that's JTC, or Joint Technical Committee 1, on information technology. Currently, the bulk of the quantum-related work is going on in a working group 14, quantum computing, that reports directly to JTC1 information technology. Though there are projects that are relevant to quantum going on in several other places through ISO and IEC. In ISO IEC, you've got your international technical committees, working groups, etc. But at the TC level, it's what we call one country, one vote. So the US has a vote, and the UK has a vote, and Canada has a vote. Doesn't matter how big you are, you all get, it's one country, one vote. And the way in which the country's votes are determined is usually via what most countries call a mirror committee. And it's called a mirror committee because it mirrors the structure of the international committee. So if there's a working group, JTC1, there's a mirror committee that's run through Insights. And there is also our US TAG, Technical Advisory Group, because the United States cannot do anything in a standard way compared to the rest of the world, just an observation. So for JTC1, there is a US TAG, and that's where balloting takes place really for everything in the information technology realm. But Working Group 14 also has a mirror committee or a US TAG, or in Insights, it's actually known as the quantum computing technical committee, because the group has the option to develop standards apart from ISO IEC, though we don't take on that role at this point. I don't know that we will, at least anytime in the near future, but we do have the option. So in terms of defining everything. So the purpose of the US committee or any other is to develop the US position that should be represented when we attend international meetings where international decisions are made. So that's more or less the way the ISO IEC realm works. At the moment, the areas that are most represented are quantum computing, and there we are mainly working on a terminology document. That's really where most of the discussions have been so far. But there's also work going related to quantum key distribution in, I think, SC27. But somebody could correct me if the number's wrong. But there's also work related to materials in areas like nanotechnology. You'll find materials related work, say, in quantum dots in a couple of different places in either ISO or IEC. So there's a lot to really cover the area. There are quite a few liaisons that will be needed and a lot of cross communication. And it's a challenge right now because there are only a finite number of experts currently active. And we really need more experts to become active in quantum standardization to really make sure that the right things are standardized in the right way at the right time. So that's the ISO IEC picture in a nutshell. And it's not the only place where quantum is being worked. There is also work in Sensenelec in Europe that I'm sure John could do a better job of, John Devaney, see, I will get that, could do a better job of discussing that particular area versus me. But I do believe that they are working on some road mapping type work at this point as well. There is ETSI, the European Technical Standards Infrastructure Institution. I can't remember what the I stands for, but ETSI also has been working in the quantum arena. I believe that the majority of that has been quantum key distribution. Additionally, IETF, the International Engineering Task Force, it is an alphabet soup, but IETF is also working in the quantum standards area. They actually approach things a little bit differently. From what I gather, they develop white papers. The white papers have a lifetime, and if they don't get picked up to go any further towards the standard, they're dropped. It's a very interesting approach to it, and so you actually have a lot of technology thought in there. So it's a kind of interesting approach to standardization. IEEE, and I think that's the last one I'll mention in terms of some of the major parties. IEEE is also working several standards. One of them is related to terminology for actually the greater quantum realm, and then there are several others. I think there are 2 others or 3 others that are also ongoing in different parts of the IEEE structure. So there's quite a bit going on. And so how do we make sense of all of this? And all right, the last activity I'll mention as part of the introduction is the IEC, the International Electrotechnical Commission, has put together a SEG, which is a standardization evaluation group, SEG 14, on quantum technologies. Its mission is to make sense of this entire arena of what's going on in quantum standardization and also the world surrounding it, and start to evaluate the market and use cases, the developing the standardization roadmap, and that'll be based on work that's already being done with the UK, by the US with QEDC, and I'll let Tom talk about QEDC, and other organizations. What does the current standards arena look like? And then what recommendations do we have for the International Electrotechnical Commission, IEC? And those will also be passed to other bodies. So we have the next 18 months to take care of those questions, and then we'll know everything about standards, and we will no longer be entangled, and then we won't have quantum anymore, I suppose, if we follow the logic that way.
That's right.
So
well, that's a great overview. About JTC1, do you agree with the idea that I sometimes hear that it is by culture and by process a layer where that's well suited for coordination and disambiguation amongst the various players? We're about to go to, by the way, our JTC1 global plenary is next week in Tokyo, and they've
That's
also
right.
announced the JTC1 plenary dates for next year in Italy. It'll be May 8th through 14th, I believe. But do you agree with that idea that it's effective layer for disambiguation and coordination? And could you give us just a kind of a brief overview about the stages of initiating a project and how the mechanics, the process of standardization works?
Okay, do I have 2 hours to answer that question? Okay, I will try to do this quickly. In terms of the mechanics, so starting with the question about disambiguation, I do think that the structure of JTC1 allows for disambiguation, and I think, as in all things, it depends on how we rise to the occasion and use the tools that are at our disposal. I do believe we have the tools. It's a question of how well we use them. And it's a question of how great our resources are to take advantage of what's available to us now. Because if I had to say the one thing that we need more of, I would say that it's the expert input, and to determine what is the best course to take for standardization. So on that, again, I'd say that the structure is there for us to use. Is it perfect? Of course not. But we can work within that, and there are steps that we can take, and we're starting to do that right now. As far as the mechanics goes for, and this would go for standards in ISO, IEC, or the Joint Technical Committee between the two. All right, in a nutshell, one can propose an idea And this can be proposed, say, as a preliminary work item. And this is sort of the lowest level that will get recognized in some way by the work program system within ISO and IEC. And so I generally will describe it as preliminary work items are permission to have continuing discussions on particular ideas, and there's no time limit set on those. Well, there's a 3-year time limit set on that, but it's a pretty long time limit then. And then the clock on developing a standard does not start until you get to the next stage. And the preliminary one is optional, by the way. But the new work item proposal, the NP stage, this is the point where you propose what are you going to do in terms of your scope of this project, and generally providing a rough draft of what you have in mind for what should be standardized and why. And I can go through what the different products are in ISO and IEC if we're interested in going into that level, but I'll finish the generalization first. So a new work item proposal, if it is approved, will then be added officially to the work program, and it will have a timeline attached to it, which is typically 18, 24, or 36 months. 36 months is the default for development of an international standard. And you are required, in order for this to all happen, to have basically a business case. We call it a Form 4 that has a business case, evidence that there are those who are committed to the use of any standard that comes out of this area. You're also looking for evidence of committed parties to writing the document. So there's a minimum number of countries that need to actually pledge at least one expert to be a part of the writing and development team for the particular project. And so you want to make sure, again, these are international standards. You have to ensure that you actually have international input along the entire way. And the reason for doing standards in the first place, just to sort of have the very highest level reminder, is you're trying, basically this is supporting global trade. You want to provide equitable access to the global marketplace for the entire world, ideally. And so this is you have to make sure that there's actually a case for that, there will be a benefit of developing the standard itself. So the new work item proposal starts. Generally, there's a project leader, you form an international drafting team, and you go through a process. Then it can go through a working draft, the next level up. This is the point where you have a good amount of text, but this is still an area where you can really be talking about details and about what should be a requirement versus a recommendation within a particular document. The next level, committee draft. This is the point where, if you're in a working group, the committee draft is shared among your parent technical committee. So for working group 14, that means JTC 1. And then everybody gets their first look at this document. So if it passes the committee draft level, then depending on the product, the deliverable we're aiming for an international standard, the next stage after that is what we call a draft international standard. This is the point where this is the last chance you have to put in your technical input. And then the way we go through this is we have to respond to every comment that is submitted through the system, and then revise a draft based on all of those comments. And then you put it out for a ballot with an associated commenting period. So after the draft international standard, and there are options to go through it twice if necessary, the last stage typically is a final FDIS, or a final draft international standard, after which the document is published. And you probably have an idea why this typically takes 36 months now. But the reason that it feels so cumbersome to start with is that a lot of what I've seen about standards development is that the benefit is as much in the forming of the relationships and the working out of the best approaches to some of these things among the different countries as the written product itself. And so you find that you generally need that. And often what happens is a question will come up at a meeting, and you have to go back and you have to go out to other experts and research it. And you're going to find that this is, as technologies become more and more convergent, you're going to find that and interdisciplinary, you're going to have to go reach out a lot more frequently than you have in the past. So you get better answers, but it does take a little bit of time. So we have to start prognosticating what are going to be the needs better. And the better we can do that forecast, the more likely we're going to be ready for the window of opportunity for the particular standards application.
Very interesting. You're such a wealth of information about this, about the whole international process and the other dividends to following the process. I feel like the legitimacy and the trust of a transparent process like that is worth the time that it takes to move things along through this. But let's bring, you mentioned Tom, let's bring Tom. Don't go anywhere. But our audience, please write down your questions for Claire. We'll circle back for, and Claire, feel free to continue to comment on the questions. But let's for now bring Tom into the conversation. Tom Lubinsky. Hey, Tom. Great to see you. I think you're muted, but I will read your.
Sure, I'm here.
Okay, perfect. Tom, I'm so glad to have you with us, both for your perspective as a CEO. I think it's a great indication that technology is maturing to the point where there are viable use cases and value to be generated when you see the CEOs participating and jumping in with both feet. Tom is the Chief Software Architect since 2016 at Quantum Circuits, Inc., overseeing key developments in software architecture related to its advanced quantum computer control system. He has been integrally involved in the development and compilation of quantum algorithms and benchmarks into intermediate level assembly code, which runs in the quantum computer hardware. As Quantum Circuits representative to the Quantum Economic Development Consortium, QEDC, in 2018, he assumed the role of chair of the Quantum Information Systems TAC, Technical Advisory Committee on Standards and Performance Metrics, identifying ways in which development of standards for quantum technologies could benefit industry and the US in establishing a competitive position. In the last several years, he's assumed the role of chairman of the TAC's Quantum Computing Group, and he is focused on the development of application-oriented performance benchmarking techniques for quantum computing. Prior to this, Tom had founded SL Corporation, which became a dominant provider of real-time process monitoring and control system software to the aerospace, factory automation, energy, transportation, and telecom industries, and worked as its CEO for 3 decades before selling the company. We're honored to have you with us. I also did some research into your background, and I see that you were at Caltech at the same time Richard Feynman was there. He got his Nobel, I believe, in '65, and that's the first thing I want to ask you is how was it being at Caltech?
Well, to be clear, I was there when Richard was there, and I did have a couple of classes, with Richard. To make it clear, as you mentioned, I was a CEO of a software company there. So I was actually, my path is very different from a lot of people in this business, in that I was at Caltech just for 2 years, and then I got seduced into computers very early. I became very interested in computers, and I left after a couple of years there to form a company and thinking I would go back, but as it turned out, I never went back. But I have always valued that experience and the interest that it did provide me, which led to what was essentially a very good career in software. I ran my own company for over 30 years, and I think developed a very unique perspective on what it takes to be successful in business, especially a highly technical business. And quantum computing is, of course, very technical. And so what I learned in that field, I think, is very appropriate.
For sure. And tell us about the quantum use cases that perhaps your company works on, or the quantum use cases that you see at the top of the heap as far as their maturation and readiness to provide value to the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, I got into this whole standards thing almost by, serendipity. I volunteered once I began working for Quantum Circuits. I volunteered to be their representative to this consortium, the QEDC consortium. It's a group of industry companies, and I was basically helping a friend at Quantum Circuits build up their company and providing some software expertise. And I volunteered to be the representative. And there was a need. They were putting people on committees, and I volunteered to be on this standards committee, not really knowing entirely what I was getting into. And in the process, what I found, I learned a lot about standards. I learned a lot about just what level quantum computing really is at, and I think we all would agree that it's very early in its development life cycle, which makes the standards perspective a little different, right? I mean, when I look at standards, like as Claire mentioned, all of these groups that are doing standards work, thousands of people involved in these organizations. When you talk about global trade and large scale, economic development, standards are very, very appropriate. But the question that always comes up in quantum computing and quantum technologies in general is it too early? Is it too early for standards? And so I faced that very early when we started looking back in 2018 at what sort of standards we might be able to consider in the quantum arena. And there was a lot of resistance to any sort of standards work. However, this is where my background in running a successful software company for 30 some years, I think, came into play, because I realized that in a highly technical field like quantum computing, there is a tendency for the developers of the technology to make it rather difficult for users in the beginning. They tend to focus on the highly technical aspects. They're enamored by how great their technology is. And I think we all would agree that quantum computing technology is incredibly amazing. But for users to actually adopt it, it's very difficult. And so my perspective on standards really developed from that perspective. It's like, well, one way that standards can help people in this community is by sort of making it easier for them to adopt the technology. So it's not so much we're making standards for that a company has to meet in order to sell their product. It's more like, can we make it easier for users by standardizing the terminology, standardizing the procedures, the processes by which they write programs? And so my focus, since I've been involved in the QEDC for the last 4 years, has been largely that. How can we make it easier for users to begin to adopt this technology? And anyway, that's my perspective on it.
Yeah, as Claire was mentioning, the terminology is the starting point often, and I suppose if one thinks about the history of classical computing with the evolution of von Neumann architecture, this also didn't happen overnight, and it's almost invisible to computer users today. But there were days in which the fundamental architecture of what are the computers we all rely on today was something that was up in the air. With your specialization in software, what do you think of the development of models that, like IBM talks about its approach to quantum serverless as a development model allowing for seamlessly addressing both quantum and classical resources in the software stack. Do you agree with this approach and this this terminology?
Well, absolutely. I think that one of the biggest problems we have with computers right now, as I said, it's the accessibility. It's hard for people to really program these things. I mean, it's not hard for somebody who knows about quantum computers, but for somebody in industry who is looking to see whether quantum computing can help them in any way, you want to make it as easy as possible. And it's also highly expensive. One of the advantages of a serverless architecture is that you can charge more on the basis of how much you actually use. And so there are a lot of benefits to that. I mean, IBM is clearly making some real headway in terms of making their systems more accessible. They have 25 systems that are available for people to use. They've introduced a number of new technology, programming approaches, so like the serverless, the Qiskit runtime. That was a big improvement. So there's a lot of rapid development going on and improvement in the field. And so even though we may be very early in terms of any sort of standards development, you know, it's going to get better. And IBM is one of the leaders in that area. So I very much agree with many of the things that they're doing.
And tell us a little bit about QEDC. My sense from the many other committees that Insights has is that often there are, before a consensus is presented at the ISO IEC level, either in big companies or in industry consortia, there is a sort of a consolidation or a distillation of the prevailing view. And is that one of the functions of a QEDC, or what's actually going on with QEDC?
Absolutely. I mean, that is, you know, the charter of our particular group, the standards committee, was to study the landscape of standards development, which turned out to be not much in quantum, and identify ways in which standards development of any kind could encourage economic development and activity in the field. That was our original charter. And so what I mentioned earlier about making it easier for users, that's one area that we identified. But the other was, I think, directly related to what you were just asking, which is the role we play as basically supplying recommendations. So we have regular meetings, and as a consortium, it's a group of many different companies, all competing companies. It's been really quite interesting for me to lead this group of competing companies and get them to participate and produce something that can benefit all of them jointly. And one of those things is making recommendations about the types of standardization that should be eventually developed by the standards development organizations. The QEDC is not a standards development organization. It's a group of companies and users. And the goal there is to develop the recommendations that we can make to groups like, IEC to actually develop standards. And that's going to be a multi-year process. But that's what we discuss all the time is, what sort of techniques need to be standardized? Where's the confusion in the community? And, I see that as a very important role for our group.
Well, fantastic. Don't go anywhere. Everybody write your questions down. And we will come back to Tom in just a little bit. Let's bring John into the conversation. John Devaney received his PhD from the Photonics Research Group at Ashton University in Birmingham, worked for 18 years at the British Standards Institution in project committee and team management, most recently working on energy, sustainability, and smart cities. Now, as the quantum standards manager for NPL, the National Physical Laboratory, he's responsible for effective involvement in national, European, and international standards development for the UK's quantum technology sector. John, would you please say hello?
Hello. I was waiting for your piece of background research on me there.
Well, you've been anointed, I believe, by NIST as a member of this quantum roundtable. So welcome, and we're so glad to have you as part of the conversation. Maybe start off by, from your side of the ocean, telling us, what do you view as the greatest current priority in quantum standardization?
Yeah, so listening to Claire and Tom, and the fact that you've set this up to talk about quantum computing, it's important to remember that this is within the context of quantum technology as a whole. That a lot of the science that is being rapidly commercialized is not just about quantum computing. It will be shared with quantum communications, sensors, sources, etc. And that brings with it the need for greater coordination. That's possibly the strongest thing. The alphabet soup that Claire described of standards activity is not just in quantum computing. That ETSI is doing a lot of work, and others, on quantum key distribution. That NIST itself, related to that, is doing the great work on coordinating post-quantum cryptography. The ITUT is leading the way on QKD networks. You start with one acronym and then you extend that out, because they're then going from QKD networks to QKD internetworks. There are bits and pieces of standardization in the offing for sensors, single photon detectors, single photon sources. There's also other single quanta manipulation that will be needed. So we need coordination across all of this. And that requires a certain amount of control, but the way of doing that in standards isn't that one country or one organization takes and grabs control. It's a matter of finding what the consensus position is from the stakeholders, and then appointing someone or some people to enforce that view. And bringing it back to purely quantum computing, I would say what we've seen is proposals coming forward that are not appropriate for immediate development. So we need to take the roadmap work that's happening in both in Europe and internationally in the IEC, build on that to build a strategy to take the analysis that again NIST has played a large part in developing around standardization readiness, and then enforcing it, and then having a police person to do that control mechanism. The other thing I'd say, that a couple of things that are worth bearing in mind. One is, it's not an absolute principle, but what we see as working best is a top-down approach here. I say that as someone who really believes in grassroots, but when it comes to standards, do it at global level, and do it at global level first, and then reach out. And so, for example, where Europe is going from a CEN-CENELEC, CEN is the equivalent of ISO, CENELEC is the equivalent of IEC. They currently have a focus group on quantum technology doing road mapping work, which is near publication. In March, they will have their first meeting as a joint technical committee for Europe. If they don't have standards being developed at global level, they will develop them at Europe, and they will bring them to the global table ready-made. So I think the world really needs to get its act together for standardization in quantum computing and quantum technology in general. And I would say it has to face up to the fact that, important though the work of QEDC and Tom on software, because how a quantum computer works is it's the results that matter, as with all technology.
Mhm.
There is a growing economy around the components and subcomponents and the materials and the mechanisms by which we build quantum computers, quantum processors. So we need standardization in that area as well. So the reason I'm coming with my my big proposal at the moment, which I know you know about, is for a new joint technical committee on quantum technology. So covering all these areas, coordinating across standards bodies, helping the development of standardization in related areas such as photonics and RF electronics, and just generally being that police person for the subject matter.
Yeah, certainly during the period of COVID with the supply chain disruptions worldwide, it's not lost on anyone the value of standardization of different types of components and so forth. The U.S. perspective tends to, as you say, let things come up from the grassroots. I think it's not a recent phenomenon. Even if you read your Alexis de Tocqueville, he, to paraphrase what he said so many hundreds of years ago, the Americans are content to do on a voluntary basis the sort of things that Europeans are predisposed to ascribe to a government role. And I wonder, does that sort of sentiment still ring true for you? And I'm also wondering, with the Brexit, are the United Kingdom's ties to Sensenelec still as they were before?
Yeah, so the UK's national standards body, BSI, British Standards Institution, has negotiated a way to remain a full member of SEN and Senelec, or at least as full as countries like Switzerland. So they can take leadership roles, they can still take on committee management and chairs, things like that. I think there is a perpetual problem with standardization of finding people to do the work. It is in principle voluntary, but nobody is going to take on the jobs of expert representative or chair or committee manager on a purely voluntary basis. And that means they need to see the value in putting resource into it. So I know that the US and the UK are definitely doing that. I know others like Germany, the Netherlands, Japan, Korea are also doing it. But it was notable at last week's IEC SEG meeting how few other countries were present and how few of them were ready to actually do any work. This is for us, all of us, to sell to the nascent quantum industry that they need to get involved as soon as possible, or they will lose out. There are several telling tales from the standards history of where one particular company didn't pay attention and paid the price in the long run. The likes of the tale of international shipping containers, which I'm afraid the United States was not at the table when the dimensions were being discussed, and as a result found that many of these shipping containers wouldn't fit under bridges and through tunnels on the American rail network. We know, my sense from events that look to potential users is that people are aware of this. Nobody wants to be the next Kodak, is something I've said before. They are
Betamax.
Yeah, they don't want to be backing Betamax. So the investors, the financial industry, pharmaceuticals are there, and they want to play a part. I think the people who are new to standards, who have largely come from a research and development background, are the ones that we need to say, alongside your R&D budget and your marketing budget, you need to put some money and resource into standards. Organizations like QEDC are ideal for pooling those resources so that small startups don't have to employ a standards expert each, but it's still a significant expense for them to shoulder.
And you have such an interesting background. I wonder if I might ask you, with your background in sustainability and photonics, is there a use case that is most compelling to you around quantum computing? Do you, for instance, see a line of sight to energy savings with the use of quantum computing in certain?
I've been asked before, what is the good of quantum technology? I certainly was drawn to the cool factor rather than the saving the planet. And we have to be honest, it's not really about meeting those demands head on. There are things in there that are great. Optimization that will save a lot of time, energy, and resources. Computing times that will be reduced, and especially potentially saving a lot of energy by in that way. But the thing in my past, I've been drawing analogies to the boom in optical communications, which was when I was involved in it, both as a researcher and a journalist. And back then, people were selling product that they hadn't made, but they knew they'd be able to make it within 6 months to a year. If you signed a contract, they'd deliver it. People are selling computers now on a 5 to 10 year promise, and they know there are problems that they don't know how to solve. It's not just a matter of a little bit here and a little bit there, and that makes it a fascinating challenge. And it makes it a fascinating challenge from standards point of view, because not knowing when the standards are going to be ready, not knowing when the standards are going to be appropriate, is going to be a difficult challenge.
Well, thank you. We appreciate your perspective. We're grateful for the investment that the UK makes in these areas as one of the Five Eyes countries. And thank you for being with us. But don't go away. We'll come back to you in just a little bit with our panel, our questions from our audience. Our last panelist today is Tim Burt. Tim has 27 years of experience in aerospace and defense through the U.S. Army, Raytheon, and L3 Harris Technologies. His PhD in physics was 23 years ago, and he where his continuing personal interest in quantum information joined with others several years ago to become the Quantum Solutions Group at L3 Harris. So Tim, welcome.
Thank you.
We understand that you also have a background in Slavic linguistics, that you scored a near perfect score of 97% as a Army Signals Intelligence Analyst at the Defense Languages Institute.
Wow, interesting. That is true, but I didn't. That's amazing.
Правда.
You can find that out. Yeah.
У нас есть полная информация о вас.
Хорошо.
Хорошо. Okay. Well, welcome. I wonder if I could start off by asking you what your view of the question that was brought up by everyone so far about the stage of how early is too early for discussion of standards in quantum computing.
Yeah. So first, I'll couch it as this is my first foray into standards, and especially international standards. Lots of experience with complex systems that had specifications, which, some were very precise so that everything fit together in this complex system, which I think are kind of quite far away from standard, the kind of standards that we're talking here. However, some of my favorite specifications were always the ones that were very general. They just sort of provided the framework on which to build things currently and in the future. And that seems to be a kind of a match with what I've heard Claire, working with Claire. I've learned a lot from her and interacting with the US TAG about standards and what they're supposed to mean. So I really appreciate the support of Insights and the members of the US TAG here. And so the favorite ones were just that framework. You're talking about this, and so let's have a common language, more than just terminology, but in the concepts and in the ideas. And it won't always be common, but at least it's a starting point rather than just sort of a wild west of, yeah, I know that's how we talk about it today, but it's different than 20 years ago, something like that. So the standards, so I appreciate those, and I think because we are talking a lot about quantum technologies now across the world, it's the time to start quantum standards. Some will be far ahead if they're more like specifications of how one builds a particular quantum computing, a quantum computer. Well, I bet that's too early, the specifications. But those general concepts, I think it is time to start about those now. Also, Claire and John, very articulate about those general ideas about more than just a standard, but also the technical report, so that people start getting us a sense of the state of where we are and where we hope to go. Not just for technologists. I mean, it's wonderful to sit down at the whiteboard with other quantum folks and let's dig in deep. But then we have to turn right back around and talk to other colleagues who aren't prepared that way. We have to talk to our business folks. We have to talk to customers. And that standardization, that effort put together by the international group in making technical reports and trying to advance some standards now, that actually helps us in our conversations in lots of ways. And so I think I'll not wax on a lot about the standards, except first, I'm glad that we're doing it for quantum information technologies. That's something John mentioned. Absolutely. Somewhere, I think that needs that context of what it means to harness quantum information is something that should be done about now, started about now. If it's not already, I don't know the whole landscape, but I am glad for those efforts. And I'll stop there for now.
Yes, certainly the concepts, the terminology, maybe even the architectures are something that have to be addressed sooner rather than later. And looking at your background, I see your PhD in '99. You were quantum when quantum wasn't cool. In fact, it may have even been, they talk about the AI winter. Maybe that was the quantum winter, as things have really ramped up of late. And in particular, you wrote about in your dissertation about quantum classical correspondences. And, Tom was talking about the software layer. And of course, we also have to be concerned about the hardware connection of quantum and classical computers. And I wonder in this regard, if you have any insights that you'd like to share with us of where you see things going. It's said that to get it to tap into the horsepower and opportunity of quantum computing, you still are addressing it through a classical architecture. And how do you see this working for the world?
Okay, I'll say a few things and see if that goes in the right direction. So as you mentioned, the dissertation was on quantum classical correspondence, and it was at a scientific level. when do the quantum behaviors disappear? Which was sort of twofold. If we wanted to have pure quantum behaviors, continue the quantum dance, under what conditions did that start to go away and it became classical? So you lost whatever extra Mother Nature had for information down at the quantum level. But also it was so that we could, but examining a purely quantum system and in all of its detail, just like quantum computing, the reason for quantum computers is because some of that simulation is way too hard already for a quantum system. We can't really analyze that quantum system. And part of that dissertation was, okay, what can we do sort of in a semi-classical way, but still get out some of those insights about what's happening during the quantum dance? And this is something that I think is also important. We talk about doing quantum information processing, but and let's say it works. It works. It's operating, and we get some answers. Part of the question is, well, how do we know we're getting the right answers? Because we need a quantum system, a quantum computer, quantum technologies to actually verify that. And so it kind of goes both ways, which is we want it to stay quantum, whatever that means, but somewhere it starts to break down to find out those, where those boundaries are theoretically and through experiment and building these systems. But also, what can we do for verifying systems that if we were to do the complete verification, like there's a paper, 68 million dimensions that one would have to do a full tomography, all the measurements. Well, that's a lot just to know that you had a quantum resource. Are there more efficient ways to probe it even quantum mechanically and then bring in classical ideas to help us verify that? And this kind of goes to, I'll say, standards. If someone says, a group says, we have built a quantum product and it builds this quantum resource with these, under these, not requirements, but these parameters. This is the spec sheet. How would one verify that that's actually what's coming out of this quantum resource? That is also an interesting question that we're approaching, just verification. And how, and I continue to think, how does that apply into standards for quantum computing, quantum technologies? So I don't know if that, there you go. There's some
Yes.
thoughts.
Thank you. I think I would have to defer to the true experts among the other panelists to dive any deeper than that, because I'll quickly get over my head with you folks on the technical level. But I'm inspired by the use cases that become possible, and I'm wondering, everyone is wondering, when some of these things will reach us. As previous speakers have mentioned, there are a lot of committees and insights, and JTC1 is a place where there is coordination and overlap with multiple different committees. SC27, in fact, deals with the content related to quantum cryptography. And in smart cities and IoT, I'm wondering about the rapid computational capacity, or the promise of rapid computation reaching the network. I'm wondering, is it theoretically possible on a mobile edge computer on a 5G network to have a quantum computing capacity attached that would provide very low latency, very powerful, high performance computing capacity? Is this something that is a year away, 5 years away, 10 years away, or never?
Very good. I would not say never. And I'll hit a few things that are coming to mind. One is Jeremy O'Brien, who is one of the founders of PsiQuantum, but he's a fantastic researcher in quantum information science and making photonic computers, things like this in the UK. before. And several years ago, I think it was his group, it even had a few qubit quantum computer that people could interact with on the internet. Okay, now the important thing is, okay, so he was talking about quantum computing, which was only one of the many things that their groups did. And I believe that there were some, well, I seem to recall some papers where he was talking about having some quantum information processing. So maybe it's not a universal computer, and maybe it's just something that can harness quantum information processing, which the current terminology work that we're doing makes clear. Quantum computing and quantum information processing are two related but different things. And if memory served, it was something like using a photonic integrated circuit with some quantum behaviors to then detect some problems, doing some blood analysis. So for some medical stuff. Since it's a PIC, these are the kind of things that can go on a phone or on a very small handheld device with low power. And that was many years ago. More recently, actually, one of our collaborators at RIT, along with others, they built photonic integrated circuits where they were looking for, I believe, COVID antigens. So they were using, and actually I should say maybe not quantum information processing, but definitely the technologies on photonic integrated circuits that helped sense that. So small sensors might very well be in the next 5 to 10 years. Metrology, as far as maturity, metrology at the laboratory level has been out there for a long time, quantum enhanced metrology. But that's not on our devices or in the wide use. As far as maturity, like with quantum communications, that has that kind of more broad, you can see that that's a little bit more mature, although according to some stages of quantum networks, it's definitions, it's still pretty low, meaning it's QKD, it's stage 1 out of 6 stages, or it starts at 0. This, I think, came out of the Netherlands, stage 0 through 5. And a lot of things are still at about stage 0. But that's some pretty macro scale things that have to work well for quantum mechanics, which says, please keep me small. Please keep me not interacting with my environment. That goes back to the dissertation and a common thought. The quantum dance, how much does it take for the universe to cut into that quantum dance? And now it's not happening anymore. It's actually pretty easy, through decoherence mechanisms. And so that's what we're trying to control. And if we have things small, like you were mentioning, mobile devices or something small on edge processors, and especially if we're on chips, it might be much easier to control the environment of generation and manipulation and then detection and things, rather than doing it at some broad scale like the Mischius satellite and the network over there. Excellent work showing some art of the possible. But yeah, I would imagine that there might be within 10 years some sort of consumer product, some small niche application, maybe a little bit more medical. I think is and this is just me, this is just very much opinion. Medical seems like a good possibility for an area where things could grow with quantum information processing on the edge, if you will.
That's right. Well, very good. Well, we are so honored to have you with us. Thank you so much for your participation in the committee. And if there are questions that any of the panelists would like to pose to each other, you're sitting in these committees and often don't have the opportunity to talk to each other before everyone makes for the airport at the end of the meeting. So I welcome you to speak. We have just one question in the Q&A. If anyone would like to submit a question before we wrap up here in just about 6 minutes. The question has to do with and it's posed to all of the panelists, what model of quantum computing do we think is in the lead? I guess that means, what's in the lead between the superconducting qubits or trapped ions or Gaussian boson sampling. Is there a winner that is presently in the lead, or that you what horse would you put your money on these days? And that's open to everyone. Tim, you're welcome to go first, and then and if you have a question for
Yeah.
the other panelists, feel free to.
Yeah, so I'll give an answer, although quantum computing itself, oddly enough, is not one of my main thrusts. But some of the systems, like ion systems, those have a lot of promise for their stability and reproducibility. Most of the technologies require a lot of cooling. And so this is where photonic type capabilities, maybe just relevance to my own history, but just that general idea of how can one do quantum information processing without having even liquid nitrogen temperatures. Can you do something there? Photons seem to be promising, and in part because photons don't interact, which is also the problem because photons don't interact. We need, if the information is in the photons, somehow we have to get them to interact so that we can manipulate the information. So I'm sure I wouldn't choose a winner or loser. The only thing that I would know is, my only view is topological type of things. Those are very neat, but they seem to be a little farther behind, or farther in the future, let's say. So, and then I will have a question after maybe somebody else.
Well, I was going to quickly just say that I'm not going to pick a winner or a loser, partly because I work for the government. But I also wanted to just point out, and then I'm going to throw it to Tom, that when we're talking about standardization, I'm glad you asked the question about the winners and losers, and we have to be really careful. This is one of the risks in standardization. We have to be really careful that whatever we produce does not inappropriately favor one technology over another. As best we can, this has to be about performance. And so that means, and Tim talked about some of the metrology, the metrological considerations. And of course, I'm from the US National Metrology Institute, and John is from the UK National Metrology Institute. So that's music to my ears. But it's a matter of understanding what measurements actually indicate the performance that you really want. And until we can answer those questions, I think that's kind of where standards would at least have to, put a lot of its effort. But as best we can, we don't want the standards to necessarily favor anything or not. Thanks. Tom?
Yeah, I can certainly comment on this because that's been the focus of our efforts in the last several years here, is measuring what these computers can actually do. And I really want to give credit to Robin Bloom-Cahoot at Sandia Labs. He runs the Quantum Performance Lab at Sandia. And when I first got into this whole standards thing, I was talking about developing these benchmarks, and he was really cautioning me. He said, it's way too early. We did it anyway, right? Because as I said, I think there are valid reasons for initiating some kind of effort. But he had a little anecdote that he likes to tell, which is like, people nowadays often think of quantum computing being in the early 60s. It's like we're right on the edge of this big breakthrough. But he likens it more to, we're in 1938, where we have the vacuum tubes, and we're at that stage of the technology. So from that perspective, I think it's, and I've learned to actually appreciate that perspective a lot more as what I've seen. The technology has so much more to grow that we're very early in that, in it, and it's way too early to pick a winner. you know, would you say vacuum tubes were the winner? You know, they were for a while,
Yeah.
right? But it changes and the technology is going to change. Now, in terms of the current technology, I do think it's really up in the air because as Tim pointed out, you want to keep these devices from actually interacting with their environment. And so the superconducting, really cold temperatures makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, there are techniques with ions and photons that have promise as well. And who knows where the winner is going to be. It's just too early to tell. That's my perspective.
That's a
Could
very
I-
fair point. Fair point. Vacuum tubes were in the lead at one point.
Could I
Please.
just suggest that that is a really good analogy, and actually in the development in the late 30s into the 40s and 50s, before they reached universal programmable computers, there were excellent problem solving machines using different technologies but focused on a particular problem that needed solving at the time. Hence the work that was done at Bletchley Park to crack code during the war, and the machines that were built in the late 40s. And I suspect the indications are we will have similar things here. That there will be breakthroughs on specific problems, and they will use the qubit technologies and architectures that meet that problem at the time. But that won't be the end of the story. And as standards developers, we have to be aware of that. That we're not going to go, oh, there it is. There's the winning solution, and we will shut everybody else down.
Thank you, John.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Here's a quick question. Should we have NPN or PNP transistors?
It's a transistor.
Yeah. All right. That's not a question. That was a joke. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're at time. I want to thank all of our participants for hanging out with us pre-holiday. We want to wish everyone here in the USA a happy Veterans Day. Tim, I guess you here on the panel has served. So thank you and for your service with the military.
Appreciate it.
And yeah, as mentioned, we have our next roundtable is going to be on resource efficient data centers and IT sustainability. There is a slight connection to the quantum domain that we talked about with John, but we hope that you'll all join us for that. And thank you, everyone. Wishing you a great weekend.